Hello my friends, welcome to the introduction video of the Mache Taxidermy project. In this video I'm going to be demonstrating how to create a paper armature, which is the structure that supports the paper mache mixture. I will be creating my own example of a paper armature, and the animal that I'm creating is an elk. So I will go through and complete the steps, and at the end of the video, once you've watched it in its entirety, you can go ahead and get started creating your own. I know that we are most likely creating different animals from each other, so use this as inspiration and know that this is one way to create an armature and not the only way. So come up with your own ideas, make it work for your animal, and use this as inspiration. To make your paper armature for your animal head, you first start by balling up a piece of newsprint. Once it's nice and squashed, then you can add another layer of the newspaper print around the first ball that you created. Try to squeeze and press the ball together so that you're condensing the paper as much as possible. Once you've got the paper wrapped as tightly as it will go, then you can add pieces of tape to hold it together. This step may require a lot of tape, so please make sure that you're being sparing in the amount you use. The shape that we're creating right now is the skull of your animal. So think of the back of the skull and how round it is, and then think of how the animal's snout extends out. So we're trying to build that sphere by slowly layering on pieces of newspaper print, taping them on, and then checking the angles to make sure that you are creating the right shape of a head for your animal specifically. Now is the time to make sure you know which part of the sphere is going to be the top of the head and which part is going to be the bottom. Once you've decided, you can use your hands to line them up to make the angles that you're going to use for your snout. Before you begin making the snout, you really need to go through and condense your paper as much as possible. You can even start pinching or pushing into your sphere to start creating raised and sunken areas of your animal's head. To ensure that the sunken areas of your skull stay sunken, you can take a larger piece of tape, press it down into that sunken area as far as you can, and then stretch that tape across so that it has something that's keeping it at that lower level. To begin your snout, you're going to use a separate piece of newsprint, and you're going to ball it up while it's up against the sphere of your skull. That way you can make sure that it's the appropriate size and fits correctly. If your snout is very extended from your head like mine is for the elk, then you might consider taking a piece of tape and wrapping it all the way around your snout before you attach it to your skull. This will help keep that paper in the correct shape and maybe even allow it to taper in size so that it gets wider up against the base of the skull. You can do this by adjusting the size of the piece of tape that you use to wrap around it, so a smaller piece of tape for the smaller end. To help make the end of my snout appear more rounded, I taped that side as well. At this point, you should check your snout and compare it to the reference photo of your animal to make sure it's the correct size and shape before you tape it on. Once you've checked, you need to press the bottom of your snout to make it flat so it will fit against your skull easily. Next, you'll attach your snout to your skull with pieces of tape. As you're completing this step, it's natural for it to just come up a little bit as you're finishing taping. So when you place it back on the skull, make sure that it's still in the correct location. Continue checking angles and making adjustments as necessary. This is when I started working on making my eye sockets for my elk sunken in. So I used longer pieces of tape and pressed them into that space in the middle and stretched my longer pieces across so that it had something to keep it a little bit sunken. This is what my elk head looked like after finishing the basic steps of my paper armature. In this next section, I'm going to teach you how to create the eye sockets and the eyes themselves. We begin by figuring out first where on the head the eyes are located. Some animals have eyes closer to the tops of their heads, while others have eyes closer to the sides of their heads. We begin by using our thumbs and fingers to press into the eye sockets in the correct location on the head. Then we'll use the same technique we used earlier to make something look sunken by taking a longer piece of tape, by taking the middle of that piece of tape and pushing it as far as it will go in that sunken area, and then using our fingers to press down in that space as we're pressing our tape across the rest of that area. You'll do this in both eye sockets. Once my eye sockets were sunken, I used an additional piece of paper to raise the eyebrow bone to make it look like the eye sockets were sunken even more. I created those separately, and then I attached it with pieces of tape. It's incredibly important to pay attention to your reference photos of your animal while you're completing these steps. To make an animal look like the picture, you actually need to be paying attention to the details in the picture. Whenever you do something on one side of the face, it's really helpful to do that same exact step on the other side of the face immediately after. Sometimes if you wait a while in between and you do a couple of other details, it's really easy to forget how you did it, and then they won't be symmetrical or the same on both sides. Don't be afraid to use your hands to twist and manipulate the paper of your armature to get it to be the right angles. Next, we'll begin working on the eyes. Start by making 2 separate pieces, wrap them in masking tape, and make sure that they are an appropriate size for your animal's head. Then you'll grab a couple pieces of tape and add them into your eye sockets. Try to press your piece of tape all the way into that gap in between your eye and the eye socket. That way you won't have any tension on your tape and you'll have a more defined sphere for your eyeball. It might look kind of weird at this phase, but just keep in mind that we're going back over this with paper mache, and we're going to use that to create the eyelids. So we really want the eye to stand out right now so that we can use a more detailed part to create the eyelid. Then I worked on raising some of my areas that are raised in my picture. For example, the cheekbones. So I took an extra piece of that newspaper print, balled it up just a little, I folded it about 4 times, and then I just added pieces of tape around that section and taped it so that it was flat along that surface and still a little bit raised. I continued to build up my layers on the areas that looked like they were raised in the photo, so I paid really close attention to the angles that I saw things at. For example, this eyebrow bone is really important. If I slanted it downwards, then it would make this elk look really angry. But instead, I was paying attention to the shapes that I saw on my reference photo to make it look as similar as possible. Don't forget that each time you do something to one side of your face, you should do it to the other side at that same time so you don't forget the method that you used. Next, I continued working on my sunken areas, so I was really trying to accentuate that the brow bone went up and was raised and then back down. So I used that same method of using a very long piece of tape, stretching it across, and then pressing it down. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope it was helpful in getting started with your paper armature for your Mache Taxidermy project. I'm really looking forward to seeing how these turn out in the end, so I will see you soon for the next episode. Thanks for watching!